Hello, Contra Costa Association of Realtors Young Professionals Network. My name is Robert Sogomonian. I'm with Keller Williams. I'm a real estate agent there. I'm also the Regional Technology Director for Southern California. What else am I? I'm a chat instructor. I am a member of Contra Costa Association of Realtors. And last year I was the president of Contra Costa Real Estate in Motion, CCRIM. Wonderful networking meeting. I highly recommend you all come and join us at that. It's Tuesday mornings at St. Stephen's Church off of Keaveney Road in Walnut Creek. You might be wondering why I have a bunch of taco stuff in front of me. It's actually not taco stuff. It is salsa stuff and guacamole stuff. And when the pandemic started back in 2020, I started actually doing a cook-along live stream on YouTube and Facebook and also on Twitch. And this year, to kind of celebrate tax season, Contra Costa Association of Realtors asked me if I would want to do a taco demo to do a taxes and tacos event, kind of like a cook-along and also tax advice event for the Young Professionals Network. And of course, I love to cook, so I wholeheartedly agreed. The problem is I'm only going to get 20 minutes to demonstrate how to make tacos. And that's not enough time to also make guacamole and salsa. I figured what I would do is put together a real quick video today, about a week early, to get these things out of the way. We can make them Monday night before the Taxes and Tacos event, and you guys will just have them ready to go for when the tacos are ready. Before we get started, we are going to need some ingredients, and I've got everything that we're going to need out here on this tray. We have a lemon, a lime, we have 6 to 7 tomatoes. I'm using 7. I like a little bit more tomato in my salsa. We've got some cilantro. I have about a cup of cilantro. I may or may not use all of it. I tend to pick the leaves off of the stems and just use those. However, you can use the stems. They're just fine. If you don't like cilantro, you can actually substitute it with Italian parsley. You're not going to get the same flavor. However, you will get the speckled leaf look, which most salsa is known for. Got a Serrano pepper in here. We have a Jalapeno pepper in here. I'm going to be using both of those. 1 clove of garlic. I like to use a red onion, a white onion, and then the whites of the scallions. And I like to kind of cut it just about an inch above where the greens kind of separate. We are going to be using the greens over here in our guacamole, so we're not wasting anything. All of this is going to get used. We're not going to be using the entire onions either. We're going to be using a quarter of each of these, the green onion, and then we'll use some of this for some of the taco stuff as well. Over on the left-hand side for the guacamole, you need a lemon, a lime, 1 tomato, about a half a cup of cilantro. You might not use all of it. The greens from the green onions that we are not using in the salsa, 2 cloves of garlic, a jalapeno, and 3 or 4 avocados. I tend to go for 3 avocados unless I'm making a huge amount. If I add a couple more avocados, I might add a little bit more of some of this other stuff. I might steal a tomato from this side and use it in the guacamole. But these are the ingredients we're going to be using. You will also need some salt and pepper. So I also have a pot of water over here. It is starting to come up to the boil. We're actually going to use the pot of water here to take the skins off of our tomatoes. What we're going to do is put in a little incision on the top, put these into the boiling water for about 30 seconds, and then pull them out and put them into some ice water over here. And what that'll do is actually just peel the skin right off. You don't have to do that. However, what I find is if you do that, the tomatoes tend to absorb a little bit more of the seasoning. It makes it a little bit more evenly seasoned, as opposed to being a little bit overly salted. And it just kind of gives it a nice, more pleasant texture in the mouth, as opposed to having the skins on. It also makes it a little bit easier to kind of cut the tomatoes up. So we're going to get into all of that. While we're waiting for our water to finish coming up to the boil, we're going to go ahead and get started by just putting a small incision in the top of our tomatoes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my paring knife. You don't have to have a paring knife. You can use a regular chef's knife if you want. I have a paring knife. I am just going to basically put a small little X incision in the top of all of my tomatoes. I am using Roma tomatoes today. These tend to have a kind of even tomato flavor, and even if you get ones that are a little bit not ripe, they tend to taste like what a tomato should taste like. Now we're still waiting on our water to come up to the boil. We don't need to add salt or anything. We're not trying to flavor our tomatoes in here. We just want the hot water to peel the skin. I'm going to show you how quickly that works. Let's start with the tomato for our guacamole. I'm going to go ahead and put it in. The water's not quite boiling yet, but what I want to do is demonstrate how quickly hot water will cause a peel to come off of a tomato. And while that sits in there for about 20 seconds, 30 seconds, I'm going to grab a spoon, nice slotted spoon, so that I can pull it out. And you can actually see that the peel is already starting, or the skin is already starting to peel. So that I don't cook the tomato, I'm going to take it straight from the boiling water and put it into a little ice bath. And I want that to kind of shock and cool the tomato. And now that we have our water fully boiling over there, we are going to go ahead and add all of the tomatoes. And if you start to kind of overcrowd the pot, that's fine. Don't let it overflow. We'll just wait for a couple of seconds while those heat up. And we're going to move them directly into the ice bath as soon as we see the skin start to kind of peel off of them. And it's a step that, again, is not required. It's not really necessary. But it does give you, I think, a nicer quality salsa at the end. Here we go. We can see that this guy's starting to peel. So we will go ahead and remove him straight into the ice bath. And the same with all of the rest of these, once you see the skin starting to kind of peel off of them. I'm just going to let them quite literally chill out in the ice bath for about a minute, just to make sure that they're totally cool. They will not get waterlogged. They will just kind of sit there and cool down. I always use a separate bowl kind of for my discard. It just makes it easier than using a trash can or something else. I get to just kind of keep that there, and I'll just toss things into it as I kind of am done working with them. So I'm going to pull my tomatoes out over the towel, and you should see that the skin peels right off. Comes off very quickly. I'm just going to go ahead and toss that. And there we go, one tomato has been peeled. Again, this doesn't take too much time, it's not super necessary, but it does, in my opinion, give you a slightly better overall texture and quality to your salsa. And I use the word salsa. I'm sure that several purists will comment and say, it's not really a salsa, it's more of a pico de gallo. And that's fine. You can call it whatever you'd like to call it. I am probably going to continue to call it salsa. Either way, it is delicious. All right, we are back. We've got our 8 tomatoes peeled. One of these is going to be for the guacamole. I'm actually going to just take the biggest one and set it aside on my prep tray for the guacamole stuff. And then here are all of our salsa tomatoes. So I'm going to pop them off of the towel here and just line them up. We've taken the skin off, which means that it's not going to take as much effort to cut through these tomatoes. So just go ahead and take your knife, cut them in half, like so. Then if you want, you can also quarter them. I like to do that. And what I'll do is just kind of quarter through everything, and then end up with 7 quartered tomatoes. Now the tomatoes might be a little bit slick moving around the board, but since we've removed the skin, it should not be a problem at all to cut through them from the backside, and the kind of pith in the middle will hold them down. So another reason I like to use the Roma tomatoes over anything else, like the vine-ripened tomatoes, unless I have some coming straight out of my yard, in which case I'll use my own vine-ripened tomatoes. But the vine-ripened tomatoes that you find in the store, they're usually not all that great, and they tend to be really, really kind of soggy. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. You cut into a nice tomato from the store, it doesn't have much flavor, and it's got a lot of kind of that gooey liquid inside. Roma tomatoes are a little bit more dry. They're a little bit more of a hearty tomato, so they don't have as much goop inside. We do want to remove some of these seeds, though. You don't have to. I prefer doing it. A lot of this inside stuff is not really flavorful, doesn't really add much to the salsa. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of start at the stem end and just kind of run my knife right along the bottom here and just pull out the seed pod, if you will, just that goop. And all of this I actually compost, so you can compost it. If you don't compost, you can toss it, it's fine. You're not really wasting very much because it's not really a flavor adding part of the tomato anyway. And then what we're left with is this nice kind of wedge of tomato meat, tomato flesh. I'm just going to do that to all of the tomato wedges. And you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to get all of the goop out. You don't have to get all of the seeds out. Again, you can just take them like this and dice them up if you want. I just prefer getting rid of some of the extra moisture because they are going to leak a little bit once we add salt and a little bit of lemon juice, some of the lime juice. So it's going to be a wet salsa, wet pico de gallo anyway. I'm trying to kind of minimize the amount of moisture I'm putting into it from the beginning. All right, so we've got our tomatoes kind of cleaned up, and now what we're going to do is work on dicing them. Or if you want to take the shortcut, you can take these all and toss them in a blender really quick and just burp, burp. But that'll be a little bit too juicy for my tastes. I dice them a little bit thinner than most, but you can do really whatever you want. And it's super simple. We're going to lay the tomato flat on its back, like so. We're going to take our hand, we're going to kind of flatten it out, take our knife, and we're just going to put it up against the back of our fingers. Make sure that your fingers are kind of pointing straight down. And hold the tomato down like this. We're going to take our knife, back of the fingers, and we're just going to slice forward. And then we're going to move our fingers back just a bit, and just take your time. There is no rush here. There is absolutely no rush. As you get more confident with your knife skills, you'll be able to speed yourself up. Just make sure that your fingers are always kind of shaped like this, with the knuckles almost vertical. And you're using that to kind of guide your knife. If you have a wide dice like this and you want to kind of tighten it up, you can bring your tomatoes together like so. Take your fingers, put the knife, the top of the knife, in kind of the crease of your fingers. Just hold it down against the board with your non-dominant hand, and just move the dominant hand up and down. And you can look like a chef dicing through everything that's left on your board. Totally up to you how you want to do it. The blender works. This works. I like to do this because it gives you a little bit, again, like a drier cut. And then when you get a little bit more comfortable with your knife skills, you can go a little bit faster. But you do not have to start at this speed. Once you get a nice little pile of diced tomatoes, you may want to get them kind of off the board and clean it up. So just bring your bowl and just transfer them right over to your bowl. Just like so. Now keep your cutting area clear. Get the bowl out of the way. And we will continue with our dice. One last thing I want to talk about. When I'm dicing for salsa, I tend to make my dice a little bit smaller because I want it to kind of mix in with all of the onions and peppers and everything and almost be like a homogeneous, everything cut up the same size. When I'm cutting up a tomato for guacamole, I actually cube it a little bit larger. Not much. I'm going to say that these are maybe 1/4-inch dice. I'll kind of go for like a 1/2-inch dice for guacamole because I want those nice pieces of tomato visible in the guacamole. Wanted to bring that up now, just in case you are dicing up all of your tomatoes at the beginning before we get to the guacamole. All right, we are done dicing up our tomatoes for our salsa. And you'll notice that we have a pretty big bowl of diced tomatoes. I like to start with a larger bowl of tomatoes, and then I can adjust how much onion I add depending on how it looks. If you want to get super nerdy about this, you can do like measuring and just make sure that you're always adding the same weight of tomatoes to the same weight of onions. I'm not going to lie, I do that myself if I'm not demonstrating, but then you need a kitchen scale, and a lot of people look at me funny when I say stuff like that, so just kind of eyeball it. Doesn't matter, it's going to taste amazing, whatever you do with it. And so let's jump into our onions. I like to start with the green onions, and again, we're just using the whites. And by saying just using the whites, I am still using some of the greens, but I want to focus mainly on the white part of the stem. It's got the kind of freshest, sharpest onion flavor, and that's what I want in my salsa. In order to stop these things from rolling all around the board when I cut them, because they're rounds, and as you start kind of cutting, they start kind of jumping away from you, depending on how fast you cut. Like that. Sometimes they escape and they go rolling and you have to chase them down before the dog gets them. What I like to do is actually cut these in half. I'll take the fanned part of the stem and I'll just make sure that it is kind of pointing up like this. So instead of flat, I'll just point it up. I'll take my knife or a paring knife, whatever you're more comfortable with, and I'll just come right down through the middle, always cutting away from the hand that's kind of holding the onion and keeping your fingers behind the blade. You'll never cut yourself. And these will never roll around because it's a half an onion, it's not a round. And I'll just kind of set them aside until I am done kind of splitting all of the green onions. Now that I've got all of those kind of cut up, I'm just going to come through and give these a slice through real quick. I can take these little strips of green onion, and I can cut them very similarly to how I did with the tomatoes. Just use the back of my knuckles here to kind of guide the knife. Make sure to tuck your thumb behind your fingers. And we're just going to kind of move our hand back as we slice through our green onion. And there we go. Green onion is done. Bring my bowl to me. And then I'll just sprinkle the onion on top. Now what I like to do at this point is actually season it a little bit. Add a little bit of salt. Maybe a twist of black pepper. I'll use some kosher salt. And it looks like I'm adding a lot of salt, but the tomatoes and the peppers and the onion will absorb all of it. But start light. I've been doing this for a while, so I kind of know the amounts that I want to put in there. I'm going to give this a mix. And I'm going to mix after every onion that I add, because I want to kind of see what the ratio is. I just want to visualize what's the ratio of onion to tomato. And I like starting with the green onion because I think it gives it the best flavor. Kind of tangy, but still fresh. That looks good. I'll set that aside for now. We'll move on to the red onion now. Give it a little bit of color. And we are going to put in 1/4 of our red onion and 1/4 of our white onion. In order to get our red onion kind of diced up for this, we're going to cut it in half. So just find the flattest side you can. I know it's a round shape, but just find a flat side. And we want to cut it from the top of the onion, where all of the kind of layers come together into that papery point, and the root of the onion. We want to go between those 2 points of the onion. Again, we're using our hand kind of in this little claw shape, and we're going to cut it lengthwise like so. I'm going to take this half and set it back over on my ingredient tray. Now this half of the onion, we have a flat side. We're always going to put the flat side down on our cutting board. And again, we're going to go from tip to tail, right through the onion. We're going to take this piece and also put it over on our ingredient board. Now here is the 1/4 of the red onion that we're going to add to our salsa. I'm going to remove any of the papery bit up at the top. I'm going to try and get as little of it off as I can. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hold the onion and slice vertically down almost all the way through. I'm not cutting through the onion. I'm leaving it attached down here at the end. I'm just kind of running the point of my knife down through most of the onion. And this is generally where people start to cry, myself included, because onions don't like to be cut. Now I'm going to turn it 90 degrees. So all of my cuts are now horizontal. I'm going to do the same thing just a couple of times on this side. And you may cut through and actually separate a layer. And that's fine. Don't worry too much about it. But again, I'm not trying to go all the way to the back. I'm trying to leave a little bit at the end there. Now that I've got this kind of pre-diced, I mean, I've got long sticks of onion, I'm just going to cut across this way. Same thing. I'm going to use my knuckles to kind of guard my hand against the knife and just move the knife backwards, dicing right through the onion until I get kind of towards the end where we left everything attached. You might get a couple of long strands like this, which is fine. We can actually flatten them out and dice them up. And now you can actually see, here's the root. Here's the root of my onion. We can actually see that I've got a couple of long strands here that are cut, but I have just cut it, I can't cut vertically anymore. So I'm just going to lay this flat and use the root as kind of my pivot point and just cut the rest of the onion up. And if I get any long pieces like that or any large pieces, I'm just going to dice through them really quick. And now the only thing that I'm left for discard or waste is the root. Everything else has been chopped up for that 1/4. We're going to add our red onion to our salsa. And again, I'm going to give it a little bit of a stir, mix through, just kind of see what that ratio of onion to tomato looks like. I'm just making sure I'm not overloading it. If I start seeing that it's like really heavy on onions, I might stop. And I like to go for kind of the more flavorful onions first. The green onions first, the scallions, spring onions, whatever you want to call them, then the red onions, and then last but not least, our white onion. We're going to cut this exactly the same way as we cut our red onion. We're going to go from the tip to the tail, and we're just going to cut vertically, lengthwise. Take our half, set it over on our ingredient board. Here's our other half, flat side down, tip to tail. And now we've got our quarter of an onion, which we can mostly cut through. Turn 90 degrees, and then mostly cut through this way as well. Sometimes you'll notice that your onion will actually start kind of dicing apart. That's fine. Leave those pieces aside. Don't worry too much about them. If you need to make them a little bit smaller, you can always run your knife through them at the end. So here we go. We can see that we have a bunch of kind of long, spindly pieces over here. So I'm going to separate them. Got another one right here, and then a large piece from the front. I'm just going to go ahead and line them all up in the same direction and just cut through them. We got this piece. I'm actually going to just cut these a little bit longer and then slice through them just the same. And again, we're left with just the heel, just the root of the onion. And we'll just scoop this quarter of the white onion in there. Now, instead of using a red onion, if you want, you can use a shallot. I think shallots, I mean, they're kind of smaller red onions. I think the flavor is a little bit sharper. It has a little bit more of a bite. So I like to use kind of the bigger, sweeter red onions. I'll give this a nice little mix. And that looks like a very good ratio of onion to tomato. And the reason that I'm mixing it on the board is because if anything falls out, I can just scoop it right off of the board back into the bowl. I don't have to worry about anything on the counter. And at this point, I'm just going to give it a quick taste, mostly for seasoning. We'll probably use a little bit more salt, but we'll get to that. I'm not worried about that at the moment. All right, so we've got our tomatoes done. We've got our onions done. My eyes are watering because of those onions, and I've still got these, you know, the half and the quarters over here on my discard bowl or on my ingredients tray. And so my eyes are still watering, but we're going to continue. I like to go next with the cilantro or the parsley, if you don't like the flavor of cilantro, and the garlic, and then I kind of add my pepper last. Let's go ahead and grab our cilantro. We're going to put it over here on the board. And I tend to pick off the leaves. I don't mind the stems, they're fine. But, I mean, if you have a really nice bunch of cilantro, it doesn't take very long to pick off the leaves. And these are really where the flavor is, and that's what you want to kind of see in the salsa. The streaks of kind of green cilantro mixed throughout. So I'm really just going to take this and bunch it together. I'm not even going to worry about lining up the leaves. I'm just going to kind of bunch it together like this. And just kind of roll it onto itself so that it almost forms a really, really rough kind of bundle of herb. Or, I mean, maybe like a cigar or something like that. We're just going to kind of hold everything in there. We're still going to use the backside of our knuckles to kind of guide the knife. And we're going to do the exact same thing. We're just going to slice once this way. I'm not worried about how thin my cilantro is. Actually, thicker is a little bit nicer just in case you like it, but somebody who is going to be enjoying this does not like cilantro. They can kind of pick around it. I'm not going to move it very much. I'm just going to kind of bundle it up together. All of our cuts have been going this way. So now I'm just going to, fingers holding the tip of the knife down, run my knife through it this way. And that's all I'm going to do to cut my cilantro. Just 2 cuts. One way, and then one another way. You don't want to cut through cilantro too much because you'll actually end up bruising it, and you'll get a really kind of weird flavor out of it. So I like to just kind of cut through it twice. If you want thinner strips, just make sure that when you're cutting either one way or the other, make sure that your cuts are closer together. That's the best way to get thin strips. And then I'm just going to take this, put it into my salsa bowl, bring the bowl to me. We'll just kind of get that mixed in. Next up is the garlic. The garlic is likewise super simple to do. I like to use a microplane grater. If you don't have a microplane grater, you can use a garlic press, works just the same. But this just works easier, is way easier to clean. Be careful grating with your fingers because you can catch yourself and give yourself a pretty nasty cut. If you don't have a microplane or a garlic press, you can absolutely smash this against the cutting board using your knife. Be careful when you're doing that, though. We're going to go ahead and just get that off and then use our spoon. Kind of scoop down anything on the back here. And scoop it up and in. And our salsa is almost done. Really, the hard part is dicing the tomato. After that, it goes pretty quickly, pretty smoothly. And you'll notice that with the Roma tomatoes, we don't have very much liquid in here. I mean, it is kind of wet down towards the bottom, but I can see the bottom of my dish, and it's not like a puddle of water. I'm actually pretty happy with this. And we can see that the tomato chunks themselves are holding up just fine, despite having removed the skin. And all of these tomato pieces are absorbing some of that seasoning. So you get a nice, even seasoning here. All right, pepper time. So I like to put in 1 jalapeno and 1 serrano. The jalapeno, I think, is the important pepper because it gives salsa its classic flavor, or at least it gives it a lot of what I consider the classic salsa flavor. You don't have to use you don't have to get a hot jalapeno, and you don't have to use one that's this big. This actually was one of the smaller ones that the store had today. And then the same with the serrano. If you're looking for something hotter, this is for the heat. If you're looking for something a little bit hotter, I would go for a Scotch bonnet. It's got a really nice kind of gentle heat that builds on you. Serranos give you a nice sharp kind of heat, a little bit different. They're all delicious. And feel free to add more peppers. This is just kind of what I like to add. As far as our jalapeno, if you are prone to kind of burning yourself with the capsaicin in the peppers, maybe put on a glove on your hand that's going to be touching the fruit. But if you're quick enough, you should be good. A really good way to kind of gauge the heat of a pepper is to take a bite right in here. So cut off the top of the pepper, and unless you're like super averse to hot stuff, take a quick bite. And this pepper is really not that hot. Good fruity pepper. A little bit of heat, but not very bad. The heat, a lot of people think, is actually contained in the seeds. It's not. It's contained in the membrane that's kind of in the middle that all the seeds wrap around. So if you want to get rid of the heat from a pepper, just make sure that you get rid of all of that. The seeds do have a little bit of heat, but that's not where the heat comes from. This spongy material is what holds on to that capsaicin. So again, looking at the spongy material, that's kind of what we want to get rid of. I'm more interested in the jalapeno for the flavor and not the heat. The serrano is where I want to get my heat from. So I'm actually going to take my paring knife, or if you have a chef's knife, you can do the same thing. And I'm going to cut off the leaves of the pepper and just kind of peel away the meat. Then I can cut right down along this spongy material. And you can see that I can just kind of even pop it out with my hand if I wanted to. I'm going to take my paring knife and just kind of get under it just to kind of help myself along. And this is all the material that you want to get rid of if you don't want heat. I'm going to cut kind of little, they're not quarters, but wedges, if you will. Then I'm just going to dice them the same way. Use the back of my knuckle to guide the knife. Come up with some nice long strips of pepper. And if you're really worried about adding a lot of heat by adding a pepper, don't add it all at once. Maybe cut one side of the pepper, dice it up, add it, see if it changes the heat profile or makes it too spicy for you. If it doesn't, cool, add the next half. And then I'm just going to take these strips, line them up, and again, using the back of my knuckle as a guide, dice right through it. Now this jalapeno with none of that kind of interior sponginess should add almost no heat to my salsa, but it should add quite a bit of flavor. And jalapenos aren't generally very spicy to begin with. On the Scoville scale, they're pretty tame. Serranos jump up quite a bit more. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and mix through our jalapeno and give it another taste. Always taste as you go along. And if that jalapeno just happened to add a bunch of heat, I might not add the Serrano. Same thing, I'm going to cut just the top off. If you want to get a feel for how hot this Serrano is, I'm going to take a little bite. Definitely has a much more potent kick. What I'm going to do with the Serrano, since it doesn't have as big of a kind of spongy interior, I'm actually just going to cut up the whole thing and add it to the salsa because I want to get that heat. Also, when we add our lemon and our lime, the acid is going to neutralize some of the heat from this pepper. So since I am going to be adding all of the seeds and all of this kind of interior spongy stuff, I'm not really going to quarter it. I'm just going to cut it in half. And from here, we can do the same thing that we've been doing all night long and just kind of cut long threads of Serrano. And there we go. Nicely julienned Serrano. We're going to line up all the strips. And we're just going to dice them up this way. When you start adding your hot pepper, if you can, it's not a requirement, but if you can, I like to cut these diced pieces smaller than the milder peppers, because it's okay if you get a big chunk of jalapeno, you'll just get that pepper flavor, but you're not going to get very much heat from it. But with the Serrano, or if you're using something like a habanero, or again, my favorite, the Scotch bonnet, if you're putting one of those into your salsa and you have a huge old chunk and somebody bites down on that and it happens to be a fairly hot pepper, they're not going to be not going to be too happy for the rest of the afternoon. So sometimes with a Serrano or a hotter pepper, I'll actually go through and just give it another extra dice or two if I see any big pieces that I kind of want to get rid of, or dice down into smaller pieces. And especially with all the seeds, this kind of helps bust up the seeds, bust up some of that spongy interior, and give you more of that spice. And that's what I'm looking for with my Serrano in the salsa. All right, Serrano's done. We're going to go ahead and add it to our salsa, mix it through. And we're going to give it a taste. Now we still have to add our lemon and our lime to our salsa. You might be wondering why I'm adding both. The lemon gives us a really good acidity and a lot of moisture. The limes are always a little bit more sweet than lemons. They're still tart. No question, they're still tart. But they have a totally different flavor profile, and it's a lot sweeter. I like to add a little bit of both. Let's give it a quick taste, see how hot we made it. Definitely hot, but not outrageous. I'm going to add a little bit more salt. Again, it looks like a lot, but we're going to be adding lemon and a lot more liquid here, so it's all going to kind of dissolve. Now, with the lemon, there's a couple of quick tricks you can do here to make sure that you don't get seeds. With your lemon, you can actually cut like just about a third of the way, and oftentimes the outside cheeks of the lemon don't have any seeds in them, or if they do, they're very small, and you can just kind of pick them out or brush them out like that. And then you get a full lemon that you can just kind of squeeze right into whatever it is that you're adding it to. Always get as much of the juice out as you can. If you want to measure this, you want about a half a cup of lemon juice. If you want a foolproof way to make sure that you don't get any seeds into anything, you want a reamer, something like this. They also make the plastic kind of trays that you can like mash a lemon on top of. But this and a little sieve, and you can get all of the juice out of a lemon with none of the seeds. We basically just want to get as much of the lemon out, kind of mash it against the sieve, and it should get all of the juice out. And all of the seeds and all of the pulp will be in the sieve. And then the last bit, we're going to take our lime. Limes don't actually ever, well, generally, unless you actually bought a lemon that's green that they're selling as a lime, don't have seeds. So you can just kind of go ahead and squeeze the lime right in. And I have done that. I have bought limes before where it was just a lemon that was green, hadn't ripened yet, that the store was trying to pass off as a lime. You'll see that now we have a lot more moisture down at the bottom. We're starting to get a pool, and that's all the lemon juice and the lime juice. And that's what you want. But better that and better the flavor than just having a bunch of tomato pulp kind of watering everything down. And there we go. Our salsa is done. Give it a taste. Oh yeah, that's good. That is a good salsa. The lime gives it a little bit of sweetness. The lemon gives it the acidity. The Serrano gives it a nice bit of spice, but it's not overwhelming. I'm not like dying over here. I'm going to add a little bit more salt because the lemon did kind of cancel out some of the salt that we added earlier. Now this salsa is actually better if you can let it sit overnight. So if you're putting this together Monday night before the Taxes and Tacos event, don't eat it. Or maybe take a couple of bites, because, you know, it's hard to not sneak bites out of something that's really tasty. And let it sit overnight, because all of those flavors and the seasoning, the spice will all kind of mix together and be way more balanced. When you're tasting something right after you've mixed it all up, especially something like salsa, where it's just a bunch of veggies kind of put together, the flavors haven't really had a chance to kind of marry up. Another taste. Oh yeah. Oh. The ultimate test, I'm going to grab an unnamed brand chip, certainly not Tostitos, and I'm going to take a bite. On the chip, and that is a good salsa. Yum. All right, we're back after making our salsa. All of that salsa from that bowl fit into this smaller container, and I'm just going to go ahead and put this in the fridge so that it can sit overnight and get to know itself. Perfect. So let's get started with our guacamole. Guacamole is actually pretty easy to do. You do need some ripe avocados. You do want them to be a little bit soft, but you still want them to be firm. And all of these feel really good. The way that I get started with my avocados, you can use a paring knife. You can also use a larger knife, like a chef's knife or something like that. I like to put it down on the cutting board and cut straight down, gently. You're going to feel the stone, the seed in the middle of the avocado. And when you hit the stone, you can actually just roll the avocado forward with the knife, and you'll cut right around it, and you should be able to split the avocado in half. This is the best way to kind of cut an avocado. You'll notice that this one here has a pretty small stone inside. Not a very big seed in that avocado. We'll do the same thing with the next one. We'll just cut down until we feel the stone, roll it forward, and then we can take this and pop it open. Nicer seed. I'm actually going to keep an eye on that because I might want to use that for decoration when we're serving. So from here, I'm going to just take my avocados, flatten them, very kind of gently chop into them with the knife. You don't have to hit too hard, but it should make the seed stick to the knife, and then you can just kind of plop it off with your thumb. If you're having a hard time getting them off, you can take 2 fingers and kind of pinch right behind the avocado seed, and it should pop it off. If it doesn't pop right out, you can actually turn the knife a little bit, and it should pop the seed right out. Now again, you can use your thumb to just kind of push it off, or you can pinch right behind the seed, and the seed will pop right out. We're keeping all of our halves over there. This last one, since I want to actually use it for decoration, and I'm going to try and hit it a little bit lower than the top half, because I want half of it maybe in the guacamole, just to kind of give it a little bit of flair. So I'm going to try and hit like the lower third, just very gently again. And then we'll see if we can kind of pop it out. Perfect. Now when we stick this into the guacamole, there is a little cut down here, but it'll be covered by the guacamole. We've got all of these halves. We've got a spoon, and we've got a paring knife or a chef's knife. Now, chef's knives, paring knives, they are sharp. What we want to do is we want to cut little channels vertically and horizontally. If you're confident with your knife skills, you can use the sharp end of the knife. If you're not, turn the knife the other way. You have the blunt end now on the back. The blunt end will cut through an avocado almost as easy as the sharp end, and it's much less likely to kind of pop through the rear skin. If you're really feeling safety conscious, you can do it up against the cutting board like this. Just make sure that you do not cut through the skin, because we're going to use our spoon to scoop out the inside of the avocado. You can also use a butter knife. These are not sharp. I'm not going to cut myself with one of these guys. And they also slide right through an avocado. They do not come through the skin. It's just how lazy are you? Do you really want to walk over to your knife drawer and get your butter knives? Usually I'm lazy and I don't. However, you do you. This is definitely, in my opinion, the safest option, because you're not going to cut yourself and you can hold the avocado steady, as opposed to having it kind of rock around on the cutting board trying to, cut that way. So having a nice stable grip with an implement that's not going to cut you is great. Once you've cut in your cubes, we're just going to take our spoon, just kind of scoop the avocado out into our bowl. What I'm going to do is add my salt now. Give it a good old pinch of salt. We're not adding as much liquid to the guacamole, so don't add a ton of salt here. But we are going to add some. And we're actually going to add it now. I'm going to take the other half of the lime that we used in our salsa and add it right into our guacamole. I am going to add the entire lemon. Adding a whole lemon to 3 avocados is also a great way to kind of keep the guacamole from oxidizing, which is when it turns brown. It's still going to happen, but adding a bunch of acid to it right off the bat, right at the beginning, does help in keeping it from doing that for a much longer period of time. And so what I'm actually going to do is just give this a quick toss in all of the acid, just to make sure that everything gets kind of coated with it. We're going to mash all of this up, but this just makes sure that none of the browning starts now. We're just coating it in acid. If you have our tried and true potato masher, this is my favorite implement to use when mashing avocado. And I'm going to go ahead and mash this together with all of the lemon and lime juice. If you do not have a potato masher, you can feel free to use a fork. It might take you a little bit longer. If you're going super traditional and you happen to have a molcajete and you want to mortar and pestle all of this together, you're welcome to do that as well. Guacamole is mashed. I'm going to set that there because I'm not quite done with it. The next thing I'm going to add is going to be my 2 cloves of garlic. Again, if you have a garlic press, you can absolutely use it. If you don't, you can set it down on your cutting board and you can smash it like so. And then you can take this smashed piece, chop it up, and then you can use the sharp end of the knife away from you, 3 fingers on the knife, and you can kind of smash it down like this. This is an absolutely perfect way to get some great crushed garlic. Keep your fingers away from the front of the blade, but use them to push the knife down against the garlic, and you very quickly end up with minced or mashed garlic. This is great. And of course, the other option, my favorite, is your microplane. Again, be careful of your fingers. Either way works just fine. I'm just demoing both. The benefit to smashing against your cutting board, I don't have anything to clean. As I cut up the tomato, it's going to lift the garlic flavors, and those are going to go into the bowl with the tomato, and I don't have to worry about cleaning anything. Using a microplane, using a garlic press, you got to clean the utensil after you're done with it. By the way, this is my preferred way of making guacamole and my preferred ratios of ingredients. If you do not like onions, or you do not like cilantro, or you don't like this much garlic, don't add as much. Taking a look at the rest of the ingredients, nothing else do I want to mash. The garlic is the last thing that I really want to kind of mash and mix in. So I'm going to use my potato masher, or again, your fork if you have one, or into the mortar and pestle, and just kind of mash and mix that garlic through. Green onions. We're going to go ahead and take the greens from the green onions, and we are going to chop these bad boys up. To keep these guys from rolling all over the place, you cut them at a slight angle, they become kind of oblong, and they can't roll anywhere. The last inch or so I don't even bother with because it usually is more work, more risk to your fingers than reward for onion. And we've cut this way. We can see that all of the onions are kind of running, you know, back to front. So I'm just going to give them a quick dice across, and that'll give me smaller onion pieces. Go ahead and put those in the guacamole. Next up is our cilantro. Now we're just going to cut it once vertically, and you'll see that I'm trying to cut this a little bit thinner than the cilantro that I cut for the salsa. So I want it to kind of disappear a bit more into the creamy guacamole. And then once horizontally, again, I'm trying to get a much finer dice here. And our cilantro is in as well. All we've got left is our tomato and our jalapeno. Again, if you don't want to make your guacamole spicy at all, just leave the jalapeno out. However, the jalapeno is going to be more flavor than spice. I'm going to go ahead and take our tomato here. And like I said, I'm going to try and dice this a little bit thicker because I want to see the actual cubes of tomato in the guacamole. And if you're wondering why my nose is still running, it's actually still from the onions because they're still sitting on the ingredient tray right over there. And they're still kind of making my eyes water. But there's some potent onions over there. And last, but certainly not least, jalapeno. Again, this guy's not even hot at all, which is great. We'll get the flavor with no heat. And again, I don't want this much pith. It doesn't matter what pepper I'm using. So I'm just going to kind of very gently remove it so that all I have is the pepper flesh, the meat. Now the jalapeno here, even in the guacamole, I'm going to try and dice it down pretty thin. Not that I'm worried about getting a hot piece or a hot bit. I just don't want chunks of jalapeno. I want it to be kind of like a flavor that's there, but not something that's punching you in the face. There we are. Jalapeno is diced. Get that in there as well. And we'll give it a nice mix. Give it a taste. Good guacamole. I'm going to add just a little bit more salt. It's a little bit too acidic. And again, letting this sit overnight, you will end up with a much more kind of balanced flavor. And with the amount of lemon that we put in here, an overnight sit shouldn't affect anything. If you're really worried, when you put it in there overnight, put a thin sheet of cling film over the top, and the lack of oxygen will also prevent it from oxidizing. So let's try with a chip. Oh yeah. That's the stuff. So we're going to go ahead and take this guacamole, transfer it into a bowl, to let it sit overnight. Grab one of my silicone spatulas and just get all of the avocado guacamole out of here. Another tablespoon of guacamole. We got the seed sitting here. Pull it out. It's up to you whether you want to use it here in the bowl that's going to sit overnight. Just going to stick it in like that. And you got a really nice looking guacamole. Or if you're planning on transferring this to a different platter or a different bowl tomorrow, maybe you have one of those Mexican restaurant style serving dishes and you're going to scoop this into that. You might want to save the seed overnight as well, separate. And then once you scoop this into there, stick it in there. Especially if you're planning on putting cling film over this, putting the seed in makes it impossible to get a flat shape without burying the seed. So just keep that in mind. It's really up to you. I think it looks cool. That is how you make salsa and guacamole. So this should prep you for our taxes and tacos night on February 15th. And hopefully this has been great. I will see you on Tuesday, the 15th, and we'll make some tacos. Have a great night, everybody. Have a great weekend. We will see you then.